the Slate, a DraftKings program that airs at 5 Eastern every weekday, Monday through Friday. We are breaking down the NFL on this fine Monday. We're wrapping up week 6. We're looking ahead to week 7. And of course, with week 6 concluding, we will get to the Bills and the Titans, which it feels like just yesterday that Geoff Ulrich and I were discussing that game. That was a week ago today. It's great to have Matt Meiselman of DraftKings back with us. Geoff here as well. Matt, good to see you. Hope you're feeling better. Glad to have you.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm feeling great, ready to break down some football. I don't know. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, we're okay. You know, we had kind of some fun last week. We got frustrated with each other, I feel like. I think Geoff likes to have that partner alongside another analyst to give himself a break from putting up with me. And, well, he didn't have that last week, so
that's
he's
not
happy.
True. I'm frustrated. I used to spend like hours with you, man, when you're doing the Madden Sims. Are you kidding me?
Oh, that's right.
That's not enough.
That's right, too. All right. Well, that's fair. All right. So let's dive right in here and do a little reaction to yesterday. You can even go back to Thursday night last week, but just the week altogether. The NFC has a lot of good teams, guys. Bucks, Packers, Rams, Cowboys. They are all 4-1 now through 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 5-1 through 6 weeks. And you have one 6-0 team. The one team I think folks didn't expect to be at 6-0 at this point in the year, the Cardinals. They are ahead of schedule. What do we make of this NFC battle, Geoff?
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head. It definitely seems like it's the stronger conference, or at least that's what the odds are telling us, right? When you have, the only 6-0 team, the Arizona Cardinals, they're not even, they're third in terms of NFC teams in the Super Bowl futures. The Cardinals are third. They're behind the Bucks and the Rams. So it tells you how people are viewing this conference. They obviously view the Bucks and Rams as elite teams. The Packers and the Cowboys are up there too, though. So all things considered, I think that as far as, again, this is just from an odds perspective, how these teams are being viewed. We've got at least 3 elite teams, with 2 more in the Packers and Cowboys being viewed as semi-elite. And, I don't think anyone at this point in the season is ready to just say, well, this team is going to go. And that includes the Cardinals, even though they're 6-0. People clearly, by people, I mean, the odds makers, maybe the bettors, whatever, aren't ready to say, okay, this is clearly the team we need to be betting on in this case, because you can still get them at above plus 1,000.
Yeah, Meiselman, what do you make of the NFC? All these good teams, all improving yesterday. I feel like it's really not too early to start thinking about these teams scoreboard watching, playing for that one bye, that number 1 seed. And what do you know? The Cardinals, 6-0. We'll get into the other shocker yesterday, in my opinion, what happened with the Chargers and the Ravens. But staying in the NFC, Cardinals improved to 6-0, and you have all those 5-1 teams in the NFC.
So I'm going to have a lot more to say about that Ravens game against the Chargers. I do think the Cardinals are the team that is the most likely in the NFC to get the 1 seed. I don't necessarily think they're the best team, though. They have had a somewhat easy schedule with the exception of that Rams game on the road, but it's not just the results of the wins and losses and even the points that are scored in their games. They've been pretty fortunate from turnover luck. I think they've had a lot of things break right for them. They've had other teams get injured during their games. Like Baker Mayfield went out for a bit of the game this past weekend, and obviously the Browns didn't have their running backs at the end of the game. Kareem Hunt got hurt late in it. They didn't have Nick Chubb the whole game. Jarvis Landry didn't play. And then against the Niners, Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt mid-game. I'm pretty sure that's right. Or maybe Trey Lance. He got hurt the week before. Trey Lance played the whole game.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
They have benefited from some good fortune, and they also easily could have lost at home to the Vikings. Like it's not like they've blown out every team they faced.
Oh, and the Jaguars too.
Yeah. I mean, they've won some close games against teams that aren't that great. So, like, I don't buy them as the best team by any means. I think they're in the category, though. I'd probably say the best 2 teams in the NFL right now are the Bucks and the Bills, and the Cardinals are maybe third. But, like, these teams are all really close, so it's not a very strong feeling about who's the best.
Right now, as Geoff mentioned, it's Bucks at plus 275, Rams plus 400, then the Cardinals at plus 450 to win the conference. Dallas Cowboys, 5th best odds at plus 600. I feel like there's some value there. The Cowboys, not just yesterday, they've shown me something here these first 6 weeks. That is no longer just an NFC East team backing into the postseason. That to me, they feel like a legit team.
The other thing that's
maybe the
benefiting
coaching's
the
a little
Cowboys,
shady.
yeah, the Cowboys are just so likely to wind up winning their division compared to the other NFC teams. I mean, that's probably true for Tampa to some extent also. They have a pretty big lead in the NFC South. But like Arizona and the Rams have to battle each other for who's home in the first round of the playoffs. Both those teams have a pretty close to 50-50 chance to not even win their division. So like Dallas is just in such a secure position to have a first round home game that I think that's what's helping their Super Bowl odds. Like that's probably the biggest factor.
All right, let's go to the AFC and we'll play the similar game we just played with the odds on the NFC side to win the conference. And you see the Bills, okay, plus 200, they play tonight. Then there's the Chiefs at plus 350 to win the AFC. The Ravens, after what they looked like in the first half a week ago, they are the third favorite in the AFC at plus 450. Then there's a drop-off to Cleveland and the Chargers, two teams that really, to me, had devastating weeks. You have Cleveland taking on a team, granted, no Nick Chubb, head coach Cliff Kingsbury for Arizona, not coaching, it didn't matter. Baker Mayfield dealing with OBJ in and out of the lineup. Granted, Donovan Peoples-Jones had a great day, which we'll get into the Millie Maker in just a second. But the Browns don't show up at home in a big spot. And then, of course, the Chargers, they lay a huge egg against the Baltimore Ravens. Geoff, I heard you a little bit this morning on the sweat. The Chargers, they are susceptible in numerous ways.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think the biggest thing about the AFC is outside of the Bills right now, I think most of these teams have some flaws. And, like the way I tried to lay it out is, last year it was kind of the Chiefs were like the team above everyone. And then you had just like 3 or 4 teams that, they all had flaws and they all kind of like bounced up and down one week. And they just kind of all were in the same pile. And this year it feels like the Bills and the Chiefs have switched, where now the Chiefs are in that pile with like the Ravens, because the Chiefs defense is really terrible. Mahomes isn't playing as good. Some guys are banged up, but I would still put the Chargers in that pile, right? Like, yeah, they have a really bad rush defense, and they got shown the door yesterday by the Ravens, but they've also got some big wins. Like they beat the Chiefs, right? I mean, they should have beat the Cowboys too. So it's not like they're a terrible team. Justin Herbert's playing good, but do you put them at the elite level of like, maybe the Bucs or the Bills? No, I wouldn't do that. I do think that the AFC, though, outside of the Bills, and if the Bills slip a little bit, it's way more wide open. I mean, Chiefs, Ravens, Titans even. I mean, I think these teams are in the Browns. You mentioned, Brendan, really haven't shown up, but they're still, a team that was in the AFC Championship game last week. So AFC, interesting. I think the Bills have definitely set themselves apart, though.
And Geoff, correct me if I'm wrong. We did one of these shows in August, and you got the Titans at significant plus money to win the conference. You also dabbled a bit on them to win the title. There they are at a big number, plus 1,800. Who knows? They could pull what the Ravens did last week, get a nice win tonight, and then if they beat the Chiefs next week, I know there's a lot of ifs and buts. But, I mean, there's a team right there. If you feel the Titans haven't played their best football yet, that's a number to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like the same point that Matt brought up about the Cowboys, the Titans are probably going to win their division. Like even if they lose tonight, the Colts are playing a little bit better. They're getting Jonathan Taylor going. Wentz is getting healthier. So maybe it's not as foregone a conclusion, but they're probably going to win that division. AJ Brown eventually probably going to get a little healthier too. Now they have Julio back. So I think the Titans at the very least, like you're getting, pretty good value on a team who, again, are they like, should the Ravens, a team the Titans absolutely smoked a couple years ago in the playoffs, be like 3 times as small, 4 times as small as the Titans? Probably not. So I think the Titans probably for conference winning championship purposes. Sure. I don't hate it at this point. I'm not completely out on the Titans. I know their defense still stinks, but Bud Dupree coming back, I think that's a team that could definitely be like a second half team.
For the record, by the way, Geoff, I know last week we were going through some of the lines, and this is why it's great to have Matt back, because I get put in a position where I have to give some takes, and I stayed away. I stayed away from Cleveland. I stayed away from the Chargers. So I'm proud of myself, because I know you mentioned the Ravens a week ago today, that the Ravens were probably the better team to look at yesterday, and that ended up being the case. So thank you very much again. Meiselman, you said you have a take on the Chargers and the Ravens. What do you got?
Yeah, so I'm definitely upset that I wasn't here last week, mostly because I now have to tout a pick that already happened. But my younger brother texted me Sunday morning. He's like, "What bets do you like for this week?" And I said, literally just one, Ravens. And I mean, it's obvious. It sounds obvious now to say. I mean, they won by 4 touchdowns, so like, it's not the most creative thing in the world to say, "Oh, the Ravens."
We couldn't keep the receipts. Yeah,
right. But I did say, like, when we were breaking down Chargers Raiders a couple weeks ago, I was very skeptical that the Chargers are that good of a team, and they have a lot of big names, but the results that they've produced over the last couple of years have just been so inconsistent. I don't think Justin Herbert is as good as people are giving him credit for. He's very mistake prone still at this point in his career. So like he's not in the elite tier of quarterbacks. I think he's a notch below that. They have a below average defense, and it's especially bad against the run, which just so happens to be the thing that the Ravens excel at, because in my mind, Lamar Jackson is the most underrated player in the NFL. He's not a good enough passer for what people want, so he gets too much criticism, but what he does running the ball is just so unusual and incredibly valuable that I just don't think people are appropriately able to evaluate how good he is. So like, I just think the Ravens are a better team than the Chargers overall. I wasn't really thinking about the matchup advantage too much, like running versus the Chargers defense. It was more just like, I would think the Ravens should be a field goal favorite against the Chargers on a neutral field, and they weren't on a neutral field. They were at home. So I would have thought the line should be 5 or 6. Obviously, they won by 28, so I wasn't anywhere close anyway in what I thought would happen in the game. Like, I would have thought the Ravens win by between 4 and 7 points. But still, like, I'm not buying the Chargers as a top-tier team. I think they're an average team that kind of lucked into a win. I think we did break down this game pretty extensively when the Chargers beat the Chiefs on the road. And I didn't really see it as that impressive. Mahomes had some fluky turnovers in that game. The Chargers had some good fumble luck. Like, it wasn't the most dominant game, and they still barely won. So like, I just think they're an okay team that has done well so far. I don't think they're in that elite category. I do think the Ravens are in that elite category though. And maybe they're a notch below Buffalo, but like, they deserve to be a Super Bowl favorite, or among them anyway.
Okay, and we'll go back to that real quick. The Ravens are the 5th favorite to win the title at plus 1,000 right now. In the AFC, the number 3 team, Bucks and Rams, as we discussed, are the top 2 in the NFC. Let's go to the Millie Maker and break this one down as far as some plays here. We've talked about paying down at running back on this show on Mondays, and that ended up being a pretty decent strategy, $13,000 when you combine Taylor and Mixon, 2 tight ends in the winning build yesterday. I'm a little bummed out to see no Ricky Seals-Jones. I guess the chalk did not prevail there, the $3,000 tight end, but there was not Seals-Jones, but Peoples-Jones. Donovan Peoples-Jones, 0.8% owned, OBJ being in and out of the lineup. He was questionable. Then he played, then he had to come out, then he came back in. Turns out Baker Mayfield went someone else's way. That stack ended up looking pretty good as well. Geoff, what do you make of this build?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting, like, I guess you'd call them pivot plays. I mean, a lot of people were kind of in on, Justin Jefferson. I think he was starting to heat up. You pivot to the low-owned Adam Thielen. People were looking at other value tight ends, pivoting to the low-owned Noah Fant, who I actually really liked last week. Didn't play, but liked. And then obviously also unique with the double tight end strategy. So, outside of the running backs, who I'm actually surprised Joe Mixon was even that high, but I guess, with Cincinnati being favorites against Detroit, it does kind of make sense. He got some ownership. Outside of the running backs and Kelsey, this was just a lineup of a low-owned stack, a low-price stack, and some higher-end pivots, and they just all worked out. I mean, the Peoples-Jones one, I kind of like the call at 3,500. For GPPs, for 3,500, a couple targets is great, but you need the guy who's going to be getting downfield passes and potentially catching a couple long touchdowns. That's kind of what Donovan Peoples-Jones is to that offense, because it's not Odell Beckham right now. So, an interesting lineup, definitely from just a low ownership and like kind of thing like that. I think it's one of the more interesting ones we've seen for a while. And by interesting, I just mean like it's full of lower owned kind of plays that ended up going off that not many people were on. I'm a little surprised CeeDee Lamb didn't get a little more ownership last week, but maybe that's about it. Every other one was kind of well off the radar.
And Matt Meiselman, you had some interest. There's another contest, of course, another Millie Maker over the weekend with a more hefty price tag to get involved. But Teddy Bridgewater in this other one we can show the people, he was 3% owned. You were into Bridgewater, but also played some Raiders. And as it turns out, it was just Broncos, a Broncos stack of Bridgewater, Sutton, and Noah Fant in this build.
Yeah, those were three of my favorite players of the week. Unfortunately, I also loved Darren Waller because Travis Kelce was extremely popular. Ricky Seals-Jones was extremely popular. So Fant and Waller, those were basically my only two tight ends essentially for this week. Sutton's ownership I think varying by contest, he's 6% here, 5.8%. In the larger contest, the one with more entries, I think he was even lower than that. He might have been in 3% of lineups or so in the $20 millionaire. And then Bridgewater, obviously low owned. Carr was low. I think what really killed the game stack if you played the Raiders was just that Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake scored all the touchdowns. And the one that did go to a pass catcher was Henry Ruggs. So it was a bit frustrating if you were hoping for the Raiders to keep up their end of the bargain because they actually won the game by 10 points, but the Broncos pass catchers did a lot more than the Raiders guys did. I have mixed feelings also about the Browns stack from the other lineup. On the one hand, Donovan Peoples-Jones got insanely lucky that he essentially scored 2/3 of his points on one play on a Hail Mary at the end of the first half. And he may have only even been on the field because Odell Beckham actually got injured in the second quarter of that game. Right. He came back in the second half, but he did miss, I think, at least one drive there in the second quarter. So like that kind of just was a fluke that worked out. But at the same time, I think like the biggest steal for week 6 was Kareem Hunt was the highest owned player on the entire slate, and playing Mayfield with a pass catcher was one way to leverage against the ownership for Hunt. So in retrospect, I actually like that move. I don't think Peoples-Jones would have been the receiver I would have picked. Maybe I would have played Mayfield with someone else.
Well, almost nobody did pick him, so you weren't alone.
Yeah, I think without that Beckham late first half injury, he probably doesn't wind up with the score he got. Obviously, Hail Marys are quite a fluky outcome, but yeah, I mean, strategically, it makes some sense at least that you would play a Browns passing stack.
It is funny too, Matt. Like both of these stacks, like the Denver and the Brown stack, like there's no Arizona Cardinals player on the other side, and there's no Oakland Raiders player on the other side. So the teams that won and scored more points weren't in there, and it kind of shows you, I guess, how valuable
garbage time, baby.
Well, I think it also shows you just how ridiculous of a score 29 points for Peoples-Jones at 3,500 is, because you could have made this same lineup and just swapped out Kelce for DeAndre Hopkins, who had more points. But you didn't need to because this was such a good lineup already that like that was the stack, right? Like why not just play Hopkins there? But it didn't end up mattering because this is like everyone else did so well. Just like one or two other quick things on this lineup. Like Joe Mixon was my favorite player of the week overall because of just how many people played Burrow and Chase and Higgins. And then also the Lions defense, who has been chalk like 3 times now this season just because they're nearly min-priced. And they have a terrible defense. Just absolutely wild stuff. But like the idea that people played Burrow and then also played the Lions together. I mean, the way for all of that to fail is just Mixon has a great game, right? Because then the Bengals pass catchers don't do as much and the Lions defense doesn't do as much. And I think we also saw the Browns defense. I think it was something like 37% of lineups used either the Lions or the Browns defenses, and they combined for 0 because the Browns had negative. So like the fact that people keep continuing, like that there's this much popularity for the punt defense. I mean, I get that defenses have a huge amount of variance. You just kind of play what fits. But like the idea that the Lions were going to have a good defensive game against the Bengals, that you need some amount. If you're going to win a contest, you need that cheap defense to score a touchdown if they're going to give up 25 points.
Yeah, so, I mean, the DSTs are variable, but it's not like they're so variable that you can just like throw a dart and be like, okay, well, you know, let's just play the cheap one because they're all the same. They're definitely not. It's definitely not the way you should be looking at it. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, especially if that cheap defense is being played by everybody else. Like I get playing Washington yesterday, right? Like Washington could have had a pick 6 against Mahomes. That would have made sense. Mahomes was chalk. Like play the defense against him because no one has that defense. Yeah. But to just go with the field and say I need the Lions defense, I mean, it seems very silly to me.
Yeah, and it proved yesterday because they were dreadful. And breaking kneecaps, again, does not get you points in the DST spot with the Lions. All right, let's look ahead on the sports book now. We can combine a reflection of this past Sunday to how we look at next week. And I begin that with this. Yesterday was a huge day for books around the world because 9 favorites covered the spread yesterday of the 12 games. I'm not including Thursday night when Tampa failed to cover and broke my wallet. As Geoff knows, I'm not sure if Meiselman followed that on Thursday.
I did. I just a quick thing on that, by the way. I know that the Eagles going for 2 is kind of it's super taboo, right? Because they were plus 6.5 and they went for 2 to lose by 6.
Yeah,
but
I remember.
That's the move, though. The Eagles do it all the time. You go for 2 to cut it from 14 to 6, and if you don't make it, you're still down 8, so you still have a shot. If you do make it, now you're down 6, and if you score again, you win. Mathematically, it's totally sound. So. Unfortunately, that sucks for you.
Meiselman, with all due respect, you don't think I read that afterwards and all these articles came my way? Oh, they're Doug Peterson. This is the Doug Peterson thing. What do you think Geoff was telling me after the game? I was so confident that I even tweeted that Geoff would text me after.
I was even surprised they did it because I didn't think Sirianni would do it as a rookie head coach. But, credit to him. That's right. It's the right move. But I would have been, look, if I wasn't on tap in that game, but if I would have been sick.
Oh, terrible. Yeah, I was getting cocky too. I felt so good. It was great.
And then you're like, worst case, it's a push because they're just going to kick an extra point.
Exactly. And also real quick, and we'll move on. Going for 2, I'm like, if they don't get it, I got it. I cover. So.
Right. You were kind of a little bit happy they were making the decision because it's Tampa's defense. They'll just stop them.
And it wasn't like a easy 2-point conversion. They barely got it.
It was a very tight throw that they had to make.
Okay. All right. Well, that's that. I had to mention that. But look, 9 favorites cover yesterday. The Jaguars won outright, and the Seahawks as well as the Raiders both covered their spreads yesterday. So then you look ahead to this week, and there are 4 games that opened as double-digit point spreads: Lions, Rams, Bears, Bucks, Texans, Cardinals. Packers, Washington football team was at 10.5. That has come down. It was at 8.5 before the show started. Now it's at 9. We'll go to each one of you just to kind of give your reaction to yesterday, how you look ahead and make some decisions this week. Geoff, we'll go to you. Once we do this, we'll shift ahead to Monday Night Football.
Sure. What do you want? Just my opinion on those games? Or
just how you look at yesterday, favorites rule, and does it change your approach at all to how you look at next week? And does that affect your decision-making?
I think one trend we're seeing right now is and I mentioned this morning, I don't remember another year where this early in the season, we've seen this many favorites of this size. Usually it's we get to week 12 and a team is on its 4th string quarterback and they're playing up the string. That's when you see the 17-point favorites, not in week 6 where teams are supposedly still in the playoff race. So there's a lot more disparity in the league right now, it feels like. And these lines don't seem out of whack, right? I'm not, there's a couple I like more than the others, but especially the Rams and Lions. I'm not taking the Lions. I'm not trusting Jared Goff to come back and get me a backdoor cover or something. Revenge. At this point. He might not even be in the game. Dan Campbell sounds like he's had enough Jared Goff for one lifetime, although I don't think the trouble with Detroit is Jared Goff. It's their secondary. But anyways, you look at some other ones. I think Arizona has proven, they had a little bit of trouble with Jacksonville. I'm not going to take them as 17, but the Bucks and the Bears, again, Chicago's pretty good at making a messy game, but these lines don't seem completely out of whack or anything. I think you'll see some of these lines come down potentially too, but there's a lot of disparity in the league right now. It's maybe a little bit of an overreaction this week. I would say if you're looking at any of these lines, probably I feel like most of them are going to come down. That's just my initial feeling.
Okay. Meiselman, you have a thought?
Yeah, I think that these big spreads at least are mostly fair. The Cardinals may be getting a little too much credit. The Rams might not be getting enough credit. That one might be too low. But no, I think these are roughly fair. I think the move for Washington is right. 10.5 was too high for them going into Green Bay. 9 might be closer to what the fair number is. So I think that does make sense. If there's an overreaction this week, I think it's probably in 2 spots. I think the Giants aren't as bad as they played against the Rams, and getting a field goal at home seems a little much to me. The Panthers, you could argue, got unlucky because their receivers dropped a bunch of passes, but they also blocked a punt for a touchdown. So they were on the verge of getting blown out there.
Sam Darnold completed 40% of his passes last week. He was bad. So
he's come back
he's
down to
been
earth.
bad for a lot of his career too.
Yeah,
like the idea that
exactly.
he's suddenly great. Maybe it's different if Christian McCaffrey, although McCaffrey has no chance to play now, right? He's on IR.
Week nine on IR.
Yeah.
Can't play till week 9.
Right. So like that's probably a big deal for Darnold. So yeah, I think the Giants are probably getting discredited a little too much. And then I think that the Raiders are seeing the largest overreaction. That I think everyone was anti Las Vegas because of the whole Gruden situation this week. And then they went into Denver and looked awesome. But I don't think it's anything real. And I think the Eagles getting 3.5 points against them, that's like, those are even teams. So I think that line should be less than a field goal.
I'd be remiss not to mention one game here too. I do think that the Ravens getting a little bit too much love as well, at almost a touchdown over the Bengals, like, let's give them a little bit of credit here, man. It was a complete letdown spot this week. They didn't let down at all. They've got a quarterback who at the very least probably going to keep them in games. He's shown he can not only get covers but comeback wins. I mean, that is a lot against the Bengals defense. It's been pretty good too. Plays at a bit of a slower pace. So I feel like that one's a bit of an overreaction towards Baltimore.
That's like the old adage of bet numbers and not teams. And I think the Ravens have been a hard team to figure out, right? They did a 66-yard field goal to beat Detroit. Going into the Indy game, they're trailing for much of that ball game, have to rally back, and then they blow out the Chargers. They beat the Chiefs earlier this year. They're just kind of a weird team. And I know, Meiselman, you're all over them, and you think they deserve to be as high as they are in terms of favorites in the conference and also the Super Bowl. They're just a weird team to figure out right now. Yeah,
and I don't think Geoff is wrong either necessarily. Like, I think both of those teams, the Ravens and the Bengals, are underrated to some extent. So like, I could see that being a close game.
Okay. All right. Well, 6.5 is the number right now, and the over-under at 47. So that's your little look ahead to week 7 on a Monday. We do have a football game tonight, so we'll spend some time on that for the next 15 minutes or so. Bills and the Titans, just to kind of set the ball game up for you. 6-point spread. This one opened last week, week 5. It opened at 3.5, but then as a result of what happened in week 5, things changed. It went from 5.5 to 6, and here it is sitting at 6. The Bills are 4-1 straight up. Titans are 3-2. Bills 4-1 against the spread. Titans 3-2 against the spread. Bills have 2 wins to the over, 3 losses to the over, and 3 wins for the Titans to the over this season. We can start with DFS just to give people some, because we have more of an audience that can be in those DFS contests, of course. But we have a look, and Meiselman, you were chatting about this before we went live today. A lot of big price tags, hefty price tags on the studs tonight. So there are going to be some tough decisions here to be made. Who's the right captain play tonight?
Yeah, this is a hard one. So I don't know if it's as much about who the right captain play is as much as it is like, who do you build around? Like, what kind of lineup do you put together? So for instance, like, I don't think just about any lineups are playing both Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill, because if you're playing Josh Allen, you can't really afford both of those guys unless like the rest of your lineup is just defenses and kickers, which people may do. But I actually really like that route. So I think maybe playing one of those two guys at captain could be interesting. Like, this is tough because I think the Bills are the rightful. I mean, I think the line is right. I think they deserve to be 6-point favorites, but I think the idea of Tennessee actually keeping this game close and maybe even winning is going to be severely undervalued for DFS. So I'm just kind of looking to play more Titans players than Bills players. And I think that's the route that gets pretty contrarian. So if I have to pick a favorite captain, I think it is Derrick Henry, because I think it's hard to do that if you're also playing Josh Allen. But it's more about just not getting crazy with like the Bills are just going to be unstoppable on offense again. And I do think the Titans are bad. So like, this is kind of contradictory for me to say. It's just, I think the ownership from the field is going to be way too skewed towards the Buffalo side overall.
Okay. Geoff, what do you think? What's the direction to go in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this game, it is interesting. Like, from a captain spot, I don't want to say you can't go wrong, but it is kind of hard to think. I mean, you've got like 2 extremely high-end players in Josh Allen, Derrick Henry, both with like amazing ceilings. And you've got to figure like Josh Allen is going to be the way more higher owned there. So going with Derrick Henry, I mean, like Matt said, I mean, I'm actually of the opinion this line is overinflated in favor of the Bills. I mean, 6 points on the road you're giving the Titans. Like, I don't know, man. I mean, this team is they're not good on defensively. I agree, but this offense has proven time and again they can keep up and they will make, serious runs. And offensively, like in a lot of metrics, they've been up the top over the last couple of years. So I think whenever you're getting an offense like that on a discount, you should really think about loading up on it. Now there's some like weirdness here. I mean, AJ Brown, is a player I would have liked to kind of have, but now he's questionable. So who else is there to go to on Tennessee, I think is the problem. I just like captaining Steph Diggs because he's cheaper. He's got a great matchup. He's absolutely due for some positive touchdown luck here. And also Diggs can have a big game regardless of how the score goes. The Bills could blow this out, but the Bills throw a lot anyways. So he could catch 3 touchdowns. Or if we get a shootout, Diggs just gets more targets. So to me, I like just captaining Steph Diggs. I think that is, you save money. You can still stack more Tennessee players if you're of the opinion like Matt, or you can just captain him and just go with the Bills dominant stack. Although that's not what I would do, but I like Diggs. He's my favorite captain for sure.
So you got about $7,100 to spend if you keep Diggs in the captain spot. Look, the Bills own the number 1 ranked defensive DVOA this year. So I'm curious as to what kind of game script we might get. And we talked about that last week, Geoff. We wondered, okay, if you figure Tennessee's playing from behind, is it nuts? Is this a contrarian move? Well, it is a contrarian move. I'm asking a rhetorical question. Do you sit Derrick Henry, don't play him, and perhaps then fill your lineup that way? Meiselman, you're suspecting that Henry might go under owned tonight in a milli maker.
Yeah, so this is just what I think a lot of people are going to do. Last week, again, in the Eagles-Bucks game, Kenneth Gainwell had more ownership than Miles Sanders. And we see this sort of dynamic a lot where the backup, because he's so much cheaper and because he's also more of a pass catcher, will end up being more popular than the starter, because if you're building a lineup where you have so much of the other team, now you need the savings. I don't think that Jeremy McNichols is going to be more popular than Derrick Henry, but I do think that Henry will be lower than he should and McNichols will be higher than he should, because if you start out playing Diggs and Allen, and then maybe you play AJ Brown or Julio Jones, and I guess Tannehill too, right? Like if you're expecting the Titans to have to throw, now you have a lineup that just doesn't have a lot left, right? And I mentioned before the show that we're going to see Tyler Bass, and leave this on the screen because it just fits so well. Like we're now looking at the chalk because Tyler Bass at 3,400 just fits so easily if you start a lineup like this. And you can base the lineup that you have on screen. You can throw in Bass and McNichols. There you go. Uses exactly all the money. Like this is the lineup. So this sort of lineup, like I don't want to play this because this is the chalk. Like this is basically what I think. So yeah, the Henry will still be 35% bare minimum, probably more like 40s. And he's the second best fantasy player in this game after Josh Allen. It's just in a negative game script, people might just be more inclined to play Allen and then play Titans pass catchers. So it's not that I think Henry will be low owned. It's just that he's a guy who's probably going to average somewhere between 20 and 24 fantasy points in most matchups. It's actually probably a lot more in good matchups. This is a bad matchup, but even in this one, you probably expect 20 fantasy points if things break at least somewhat normally. And Diggs is going to be more popular than him. I think AJ Brown or Julio Jones, depending on that injury situation, that could be a little quirky, but Henry could be the 6th highest owned player in this game, something like that, when he probably deserves to be number 3, if not number 2, behind Allen and then maybe Diggs.
Julio Jones was a full participant in practice. He's no question playing. He's fine for tonight. AJ Brown was added to the injury report yesterday with the illness. It's non-COVID related. What if Brown gets ruled out? Let's just play that game quick. Do you maybe think about throwing Julio in the captain spot?
Yeah, that would be interesting because
right? It's contrarian,
it'll depend.
Right?
So depending what time that is, like we could get NBA style swapping edges there, because if that news doesn't come out until like 7:45, that's late enough where a lot of people may not make the switch. But if we get that, like 5 minutes after we get off air or something, at 6:10, let's say, like enough people will know that that's going on where you just see Julio get unbelievably popular, and then we may see guys like Westbrook-Ikhine or Chester Rogers or Josh Reynolds, like all those guys will be more popular. And then also Derrick Henry becomes more popular too, because it's much easier to fit him because now you can play these cheaper Titans receivers. In that scenario, it really depends. Like, I think the timing of news is one of the more underrated things in DFS. Like last week, we didn't get to talk about this much, but Dalvin Cook was actually ruled out pretty late. Like, it came Sunday morning. And because of that, Alexander Mattison was only 30 to 50% owned in some contests. If that news had come a day earlier on Saturday, Mattison would have been like 80% or something approaching, I think, at least like a number in that area. So we could see this. We could see this happen with Julio, where like if this news happens in the next 10 minutes, Julio's the top owned player tonight because it's just too obvious. And if it happens really close to the game, then Julio is actually a lot more appealing because less people get there. So these are very nuanced and tricky situations, I think, when we have a game time decision.
Okay. Geoff, do you have any other value guy you'd like to suggest? I mean, the guy from Meiselman is Tyler Bass, a kicker.
Yeah, I'll go to I'm going to go with this is just, again, I mean.
Absurd?
It's not absurd, but it's just, I mean, Gabriel Davis. I mean, it's just a name that like everyone, everyone's already talking up Josh Reynolds. And that I think Josh Reynolds is definitely someone you could potentially look at. Although again, you're going to want to do the lineup, checking towards, I mean, he's I believe he's been inactive a couple games. If I can remember back. Yeah, he has. So there's no guarantee there, but obviously he's really cheap, but people are going to be thinking about him. People are probably going to be thinking a little bit about like a guy like Ferkser. Everyone is like Gabriel Davis has lost targets to Dawson Knox, to Emmanuel Sanders, but this is a player 2000 who, much like Donovan Peoples-Jones, it's just like you're just looking for one play. And if you get it and Dawson Knox doesn't find the end zone here, like that dynamic, I think that dynamic could switch for a week. And I think against the pass defense like Tennessee, this is the kind of defense where it could easily switch. Again, you've got a fast-paced game. You're probably going to see some really fast-paced, just changes of possession and things like that. I think this is the right game script for it. So Gabriel Davis is just a name that I see there. I think he's more than capable of catching just that one long pass for a touchdown. And I don't think anyone's going to play him. So that's just one person who you're looking for ways to fit like Diggs, Henry, Allen in. I mean, that's a way to go.
Okay. And just as a reference, we'll go to the sports book now. These two teams played week 5 last year. The Titans were at home and scored 42 points. They won 42-16. Josh Allen was not great in this game. 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Tannehill and Henry combined for 5 touchdowns in the game they played head-to-head last year. That was right around this time a year ago. Some other trends to look for here on the sports book. We mentioned how Buffalo opened as a 3.5-point favorite. That line was put out week 5. Of course, the games took place, and those have changed. It's 6-point spread now. Bills are 2-0 on the road, 3-1 in the AFC against the spread. The Titans, they're 2 unders this year. They're not that this comes off as a little confusing, but they're game unders. They scored 13 points against the Cardinals, 16 against the Colts. Geoff, I heard you this morning. I like the over in this game too. 53. It came down a half point. I think it opened at 52. The total. It opened at 53 and a half. It went up to 54. It's back to 53.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the Titans are too good offensively from what they've shown so far at home. They're in a spot, I think, to be better. I know the Bills have a really good defense, DVOA, number 1 in the league.
Yeah, they do. And they've played really well. They've also played some incredibly terrible teams. So I personally, I think that's the one place where Buffalo maybe just getting like a little bit too much credit right now. I mean, I know they did a number on Patrick Mahomes, and that definitely deserves something. But like, I don't know, man. I mean, they also they had the benefit of playing, with the Texans and things like that. So I think that the main thing about that I always take away from both these teams, and it's been this way for the last couple of years, they're fast paced. They both play at faster paces. They both run a lot of plays. And typically when you get 2 teams that do this and they meet, it just becomes a track meet some way or another. Maybe the defenses score. Maybe Buffalo gets ahead like 24-0, but then Tennessee gets a ton of garbage time and all of a sudden they've got 21 points. So even with the Bills playing good on defense, I think this just delves into that kind of game eventually. And I think that, this total, it's just maybe like a point or two low. I mean, I really do.
Okay.
I know why people are trepidatious about it, and I understand like the Bills have been tough to score on, but man, I don't want any part of failing the Titans offense here.
Meiselman, what do you want to touch tonight on the game lines? You have a prop. I know Jeff likes the, just to, I won't bury the lead here for Jeff in case you run out of time, but he likes Steph Diggs. Anytime touchdown, Jeff, for the Steph Diggs tonight?
Yeah, I mentioned, I mean, you're basically getting plus 100. I mean, this is a player who averaged a touchdown every second game last year with Josh Allen. He scored 6 or more in each of his last 4 seasons, going up against a weak pass defense that allows big plays. He's got 1 touchdown in 6 games. He's just due for it. And he's due. I know that sounds stupid, but the projections say this is a great spot for Steph Diggs. I mentioned the extra plays. These two teams are going to see extra plays. This is the kind of spot where I don't mind taking a touchdown prop with Diggs. And I don't do it very often. I rarely talk about touchdown props because they're so variable, but I think this is a spot where plus money is too good to pass up on Diggs.
Okay. Meiselman, what are your thoughts on this game, sportsbook wise?
So the best opportunity to me is if AJ Brown gets ruled out, then you can just hammer Julio Jones. And I don't think that there's any other relevant receivers available there. Like you're not going to be able to hit a Josh Reynolds prop because we just don't have that. But because he's just not a significant enough player where we would have odds listed for him. But I think betting the over on Julio would make sense if Brown weren't playing. But barring that, like I think that this game is priced really fairly. Like I think the total's fair. I think the spread's fair. I think really what's going on is both of these teams are overrated to some extent. Like I do think the Bills are really good, but they're not quite as good as they've played. And the Titans haven't played well, but I think they are a legitimately very flawed team that basically just has skill players and no other talent like elsewhere on the roster. And so much of their talent is their running back, which doesn't translate to winning that well because running just isn't as useful for winning football games as passing is. And Ryan Tannehill, while he does have really good weapons now, is not a great quarterback. He's a decent one. But despite that, I think like because the Bills have been overachieving a little, there isn't really any value here. But I do think that because of the perceived game script that the Bills are going to have this big lead that most people think, that there could be some value on the over for Derrick Henry's rushing prop. Like that just seems deflated a little bit to me. It's at 94.5. And I think that line probably deserves to be a little bit higher than that. I think it's maybe being priced in too much. The Bills have such a strong run defense when it probably isn't true that they're the best defense in the NFL by such a large margin anyway, right? Like they might be the best, but not to such a massive extent like most people are perceiving now. So I think there's a little value there potentially, but I'm really thinking just staying away from sports betting on this game unless we get AJ Brown news. That would really open things up specifically for Julio.
So Jeff mentioned this, the schedule for Buffalo to me does jump out because we found out what the Dolphins are made of. Bills scored 35 in that game. I'm looking at that since week 2. Of course, they lose to the Steelers at home. Then they dropped 43 against Washington. We found out they're not very good. The Texans, 40 points. The Chiefs scoring 38. And to Jeff's point, Chiefs still got 20 points in that game. So I think if you're talking about looking at an over 53 points, I think you're hopeful with this Titans passing attack with Julio back. If AJ Brown's healthy, if they can get Henry going in some capacity, you can still get the mid-20s mark for the Titans. They're averaging 26 points per game this season. Bills averaging 34. Just to, promote the product here at DraftKings, you can do a little same game parlay. And if you're afraid of the number, 6 points freaks me out too, Jeff. So what if you say you pick the Bills on the money line and you take the over? It's a plus money, plus 160. That might be a better bet, in my opinion, going money line with Buffalo. Jeff, do you think Tennessee's going to win this game potentially tonight?
No, I'm not going to give them that much credit. I think that, again, there is a clear discrepancy. I mentioned the Bill. I thought the Bills were the clear outright right now in the AFC, and I'm just not sure the Titans are there yet. But I will give the Titans more credit than most people. I mean, Matt mentioned they only have skill players. The skill players are really good though, so they are getting Bud Dupree back today, which is again I think a bit of an underrated news item that people aren't looking at enough. This defense, we waited all year, didn't really get better last year, but I do think this defense, it's got to get a little bit better at some point. So I'm going to give them some credit. Like I said, I think 6 points is too much. I am on Tennessee plus 6 here, but I'm not going to go so far as saying you should be going money line here. Although the Titans, what they have done under Mike Vrabel, man, is every time they're in these spots and people just don't give them a chance. I mean, I remember when they were double-digit underdogs against the Ravens and they just walloped them in the playoffs 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
The Titans are just a team I don't like to, especially at these odds. I just rarely going to take the other side against them.
Okay. Meiselman, final thought?
Yeah, I just want to give a little bit of context, a little more context to this idea that being a good running offense doesn't make teams good. The Titans are still 21st in the NFL in offensive DVOA this year, despite having Derrick Henry. And this is a very dated reference, but I think it's one that people will know that illustrates this point. So in Adrian Peterson's career with the Minnesota Vikings, they finished in the top half of the NFL in offensive DVOA exactly one time. And they had, I mean, Peterson in his prime was arguably the greatest running back in NFL history, certainly in the top 5. They finished in the top half of the league once, and it was the year that Brett Favre had like the best year of his career where he came back for that one season, threw like only 3 interceptions and 1 million touchdowns. So like if that example doesn't show you that running doesn't make you a good offense, and I get like some people might criticize DVOA as a statistic then, but like if you just look at examples where teams were primarily good at running but not much else, you'll see that those teams just don't produce good records. So like for me, the Titans still, they have a win total over under right now at 9.5. Like I think that's at least a win too high. And I mean, I still think they can win this game, right? So I'm kind of going back and forth because I don't think the Bills are that amazing, but I don't like the Titans probably end up winning 8 or 9 games this year, not 10. And they may hang around in this one just because like they have enough skill players to not be terrible, but they're lacking in enough significant areas that like Derrick Henry is not going to make this team a Super Bowl contender. And I know they have Julio and AJ Brown, but they don't have the quarterback skill either to necessarily elevate those guys to the level that I think people are expecting. So
that, if Tennessee does tank, that is probably going to be the reason why. Like Ryan Tannehill, just because he really hasn't been that good this year. So it's a fair point.
Last thing I'll mention.
I'm going to take that analysis and play him in Showdown tonight because
that's right,
he's contrarian. Like it's 2 different things. It's, you know, the ownership will dictate DFS decisions, even if it's not the same thing as what you think will happen.
While we're on that, I kind of like Tannehill's over prop for his rushing. So
what's the number?
I can't remember. I don't know what it is. When I looked this morning, it was like really low, like 16, maybe. I can't remember. You can look it up, Brendan.
That's what I'm doing. Shoot. Passing and rushing yards. That's not up now. QB props. Rushing props.
Interesting. We haven't.
There it is. 17 and a half. 17 and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And down the stretch here for the Titans, home Bills. Then they have the Chiefs, home, at Colts, at Rams. That's a tough stretch. There's a big game tonight for the Titans. We got to go. Meiselman, you're back tomorrow with Sharag. We have our first NBA version of the slate coming your way tomorrow. The NBA starts tomorrow night. So we'll dive into some props and we'll look ahead to the 2 games that are on the slate tomorrow night. Geoff, we'll see you next time. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks to Eamon, and also thank you to Andrew behind the scenes. For Matt Meiselman and Geoff Ulrich, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for watching the slate. We are back here tomorrow at 5, and be sure to watch The Sweat tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. YouTube, Twitch, and on Twitter. We'll see you.